Okay. Today we're gonna be proving that Mecca is actually Petra. And to start off, we're gonna be reading from the book of Let the Stone Let the Stone Speak by Dan Gibson. He did a study on this. I don't think anyone has come close to the amount of information that Dan Gibson has come up with. And he has another book which we're going to be reading from as well, but starting off we're going to be reading from Let the Stone Speak. Page 119, Al-Azraqi recorded the dimensions of the pre-Islamic Kaaba. He documented the sides of the Kaaba as northeast 32 cubits, northwest 22 cubits, southwest 31 cubits, and southeast 20 cubits. The proportions of this early Kaaba were roughly 3:2. If we calculate a cubit as 0.53 meters, then the dimensions would have been 17 meters by 11.6 by 16.4 by 10.6 meters. Notice that the earliest Kaaba was not perfectly rectangular, but had an irregular shape, which will prove crucial in identifying its remaining foundation. Using the measurements recorded by Al-Azraqi, we have illustrated the length of the northeastern wall on the two figures below. We have imposed a red line measuring 17 meters on satellite photos of the current Kaaba in Mecca and the proposed Petra Kaaba. By Al-Azraqi's description, the original Kaaba was much longer than the Kaaba in Mecca today, but the Petra Kaaba suits Al-Azraqi's measurements perfectly. So this is the line that he drew. This is 17 meters long, and it's way shorter than the length given, as you can see. Okay, and this is the Kaaba in Petra, which he believes is the real Kaaba. This is the foundations of that Kaaba. Okay, so page 250. The names of Petra were examined and compared with common names used to describe the original holy city of Islam. Okay? After examining the names of the city, we explored the Nabatean roots of the Arabic of the Quran. We argued, based on the observation of Mark Drury, that the language of the Quran is much more consistent with the Nabatean Aramaic and Arabic of southern Jordan and than the Bedouin Arabic of the Hijaz. See that? So the Arabic of the Quran, the language of the Quran, is much closer to that was being used in Petra by the Nabateans. And actually there's a study done by a man named Christoph Luxemburg on the Syro-Aramaic reading of the Quran. That's the name of the book, the Syro-Aramaic reading of the Quran. So many ambiguous terms in the Quran that make no sense actually turned out to be Syro-Aramaic words. Unfortunately, I couldn't include the book or the study. It's a very complicated study. I felt like it was going to be a waste of time, to be honest, because many of the people watching this do not read Arabic, and so they're not going to be able to follow up with what the study is about and what it teaches and stuff like that. So I didn't include it. But if you're someone who reads Arabic, Christoph Luxemburg did a study on the Syro-Aramaic reading of the Quran. If you want to see like Syro-Aramaic words in the Quran being deciphered and whatnot. So page 71, traditionally Muslims have always believed that Mecca was a very great and ancient city. So the lack of archaeological discoveries was somewhat of a surprise to outside observers. Where were the ancient walls of the city? Certainly, some ancient remains should have been found. From the temple of Hubal that stood right beside the Kaaba, the temples of Allat and Dushara should have been somewhere in the ancient city. This is a big problem for Mecca. In its current location, there's no history. The current location of Mecca in Saudi Arabia, it's not mentioned on any maps. There's no walls for the city or archaeological discoveries. No one has been able to find anything really in Mecca that proves it's an ancient site with a lot of history. There is also a mother of settlements in the Quran. Surah 692 reads, "This is a blessed book that we have sent down, confirming that which came before it, that thou mayest warn the mother of cities and those around her. Those who believe in the hereafter believe in it, and they are mindful of their prayers." Muslim scholars believe that the mother of cities in this passage refers to Mecca. If this is an Arabic equivalent of the Greek metropolis, we may find it sensible to locate the city in Surah 692, much closer to the Greek world. Gibson and Hermos, hope I pronounced that right, I'm so sorry if I didn't, have observed that by the 3rd century the full official title of Petra was the verbose. Okay, this is quite long, I'm going to just read the one below it. Greek official titles of the city appear in Petra papyri. The full translated title appears in these papyri as Imperial Colony Antoniana, Distinguished Holy Mother of Colonies, Hadriana Petra Metropolis of Tertia Palestinia Salutaris. So this is the translation apparently of the Greek, this sentence in Greek above, and it calls Petra the mother of colonies, right? She is the distinguished holy mother of the colonies. And this is quite interesting because Petra was such a big city, the smaller colonies around it were being controlled by Petra. That's why they called her the mother of colonies, because it was being controlled by the city of Petra. Petra was the capital of that region, basically. That region around Petra, I think, was called Arabia Patria. The region around Petra was called Arabia Patria, and the colonies around, in that region were under the control of Petra. So it was called the mother of colonies. Okay, at this time, there were some despotic brothers in the regions of Arabia Patria in the place called Paran, which is now called Mecca. Warlike chieftains, worshippers of the temple of the image of the Ammonite temple called Samam and Kabar. It happened that one of them, called Abdullah, died, leaving his son of tender age called Mahmud. In this account, Artsruni records that the Prophet Muhammad was born and raised in Mecca, in the part of Arabia Patria called Paran. Okay, Arabia Patria was the early name of the Roman province, which was the former Nabatean kingdom. The capital of Arabia Patria was Petra, and that seems to be the city Artsruni referred to. Gibson and Hermos. Again, I do apologize if I'm not pronouncing the name correctly, have found only one clear reference to Mecca in the Quran. In Surah 48:24, Mecca is referred to as a valley, and not explicitly as a city. He it is who restrained their hands from you and your hands from them in the valley of Mecca, after having made you victorious over them, and God sees whatever you do. Even in this case, one should note that in Aramaic, a common vernacular language, in Petra the word Mecca meant valley, which is another suitable toponym for Petra. In the Torah, we are told of a people known as the Zamzumim. Okay, Deuteronomy 2:20, as Rephaim, the Zamzumim were a tall people who lived in the land of Seir. One of the early names given to the Petra mountains was Mount Seir. So there is a possibility that Zamzam well at Seir was named for its ancient inhabitants, the Zamzumim. Okay, so a people called Zamzumim lived in the region of Petra, and as we all know, Muslims, their holy water in Mecca is called Zamzam. For the Muslims, they have a holy spring, it's a well of water, actually, they have a holy well of water in Mecca called Zamzam. And Dan Gibson here tells us that the Zamzumim might have been named after that well of water. They were named Zamzumim. And these Zamzumims, as we've said, used to live in the Mount Seir region. That's in, the Petra region, basically. Now he says that there's only one mention of Mecca. There's actually a lot, like many times Petra has been mentioned, but different names. We're going to be showing you guys how they were referring or how they were implying that Mecca is Petra from the Quran. I've added some, like this verse down here, as you can see. We're going to read this. I added this verse, but I'm going to show you that the Quran actually tells us that Petra is Mecca. I'm going to show you that the Quran tells us that Petra is Mecca. Gibson's research in Qibla directions has raised a number of objections. Gibson believes that the original Quran was in the city of Petra. I'm so sorry. The original Kaaba was in the city of Petra, and that the Kaaba in Mecca is not an ancient structure, but that it was built after the Second Islamic Civil War. He suggests that there was little in Mecca in the Hijaz, other than a wall. When the black stone was moved there for safekeeping during the war around 17 after the Hijrah, or 690 CE, a short distance east of Mecca in Saudi Arabia is Huma al-Numur. In the region of Huma al-Numur are more than 60 early Islamic inscriptions, which include prayers and scriptures from the Quran. One of these inscriptions explicitly records the year that Masjid al-Haram was built. The following is a line-by-line translation of this inscription. Al-Rayyan ibn Abdullah testifies that there is no God but God. Amen. And this inscription was written in the year the Masjid al-Haram was built, year 78. Some have insisted that it would be absurd to say that the Kaaba was built in 78 AH, after Hijrah meaning, and so the inscription must mean built again rather than built. But there is no indication from the text that this is inferred. This inscription dates the building of the Meccan Kaaba to 78 after Hijrah, and fits Gibson's Qibla findings perfectly. Before this, mosques in Islam all faced the city of Petra as demonstrated by Gibson's data. Okay, so a rock inscription that tells us that the Masjid al-Haram was built in 78 after Hijrah. Right, the year 78 after Hijrah. And there was a reason that it was built in the year 78 after Hijrah. There was a civil war in Petra or Mecca, and they had to relocate the Kaaba. So we're going to read about this. But first of all, let's read this Quranic verse. And Lot was indeed one of the messengers. Remember when we delivered him and all of his family except an old woman, who was one of the doomed. Then we utterly destroyed the rest. You Meccans certainly pass by the ruins day and night. Will you not then understand? The people of Lot, as we all know, lived in the Dead Sea region. That's where they lived. They used to live in the Dead Sea region, nowhere near the current location of Mecca. So the only way this would make sense is if Petra is Mecca. Okay? Sibius, the Armenian bishop and historian, was contemporaneous with the Arab conquest. This means that he was living at the time of the Arab conquest, and wrote that the Arabs set out from the Paran desert. Today many Muslims cite Sibius as evidence that the Prophet is mentioned in non-Islamic history, and thus the Prophet really existed. But they usually fail to note that Sibius located the Prophet Muhammad and the founding of Islam in Paran, not in the Hijaz. The only major city near Paran was Mount Seir, known to the Roman West as Petra. As we have explored previously, the Armenian writer Thomas Arstruni recorded at this time there were some despotic brothers in the region of Arabia Petraea, in the place called Paran, which is now called Mecca. Warlike chieftains, worshippers of the temple of the image of the Ammonite temple called Samam and Kabar. It happened that one of them, called Abdullah, died, having a son of tender age called Mehmet. Artsruni was very precise when he wrote Arabia Petraea in Paran. Arabia Petraea was the former name of the Roman province which had Petra at its capital. Okay. Another Islamic writer, Al-Hamadani, wrote in Geography of the Arabic Peninsula that Paran mountains around Mecca were named after Paran, the son of Amalek. Al-Azraqi also associated the Amalekites with Mecca. The history of the Amalekites is relatively well known. The Amalekites lived north of Edom, not in Saudi Arabia. Chronicles 4:42-43 explains that a remnant of the Amalekites fled to Mount Seir and remained there. Okay. The story of Zamzam well appears in Bukhari's hadiths, narrated by Ibn Abbas. Bukhari describes that after Abraham's second son Isaac was born, Abraham declared him to be the son of promise. Choosing the second son caused discourse between Abraham's two wives, Sarah and Hagar. As a result of the discord, Abraham took Hagar and Ishmael to an uninhabited valley to abandon them. Bukhari tells us that Hagar was still suckling the boy. Abraham brought Hagar and Ishmael to a small hill in the valley. The hill is described as the highest place in the valley by some writers, while others describe it as a long hillock. Abraham did give them a leather bag containing some dates and a small water skin, and then started to leave them. Hagar followed him, saying, "O Abraham, where are you going? Leaving us in this valley where there is no person whose company we may enjoy, nor is there anything to enjoy." But Abraham did not immediately look back. Hagar asked him, "Has Allah ordered you to do this?" He said, "Yes." She said, "Then he will not neglect us." Abraham departed. On reaching the Thaniya, or the narrow canyon where he could turn and disappear out of sight, he turned around and prayed toward Hagar and Ishmael, and the future site of the Kaaba. This story fits Petra landscape. Abraham would have left them on the small hillock near where the Petra Kaaba stands today, and he would have walked across the valley where the colonnaded street would one day be built. He would have turned and prayed before he entered the area where the street of facades would later stand, and then he would have departed the valley through the Seek. Hagar eventually ran out of water and could no longer suckle Ishmael. He began to cry with hunger, so she left him and climbed the nearest mountain, which was later known as Safa. She stood on this mountain and looked to see if there was anyone around, but there was not. Then she descended from Safa and found the child still crying, so she ran across the valley and climbed the mountain, which would later be known as Marwa. But she could not see anyone from Marwa either. Hagar ran between Safa and Marwa 7 times. The Prophet Muhammad confirmed the pre-Islamic tradition of walking 7 times between Safa and Marwa in remembrance of Hagar as part of the Islamic pilgrimage. Okay? So Muslims today walk 7 times between Safa and Marwa as part of the tradition of remembering Hagar, having to look for water for her son. So we're told that it's a mountain, right? This is the Mount Marwa in Saudi Arabia. This is no joke. This is the actual Mount Marwa. Okay, according to what Muslims claim, this is Mount Marwa. It's not even a hill, as you can see. This is not even a hill, yet they claim it's a mountain. And this is the cave in Mecca, in Saudi Arabia, where the Prophet received revelation. This is where he used to go for worship, to abstain from all of the materialistic goods of this world, and he would devote himself to God and God alone, and it's not really a cave, is it? According to the Islamic sources, he used to go to a cave, but this is a slab of rock resting against another slab of rock. One slab of rock resting against another is not really a cave, is it? I mean, this doesn't really protect against any of the elements. Let's go ahead and see what Dan Gibson has to say about this cave, the Cave of Revelation.
Now, Ibn Hisham relates to us a very interesting story. It's very early in Islamic history. Only a few people have converted to Islam at this time. One of those was a man known as Al-Tufail bin Amr of Mecca. He accepted Islam on one of his journeys, and once he returned home to Mecca, his wife also decided to accept Islam. Al-Tufail then tells his wife to go to the temple of Dushera and cleanse herself there. In the sacred area, there was a trickle of water where she could wash herself. She did this and returned home and learned about Islam.
Did this story take place in Mecca, 1,000 kilometers away, where there is no temple to Dushera? Or did it take place here in Petra? If it did, then Dushera's temple is there. She would have come down to this temple, washed herself, and gone home. Is there a temple to Dushera in Mecca, in Saudi Arabia? No. There are no temples, no cracks in the rock, no water stream, no city walls, no grass, no trees, nothing. It's all here in Petra. And for the first 100 years, every mosque in the entire Islamic world pointed here to Masjid al-Haram, the forbidden gathering place, here in Petra. There is no other city in the world that fits this description so perfectly.
No, Al-Haktab had so harassed Zayd that he forced him to withdraw to the upper part of Mecca, and he stopped in the mountain of Hira, facing the town.
It's interesting to note that in this account, Mount Hira is located in the upper part of Mecca. If you go to Mecca today, the cave of Hira doesn't face the city. But here in Petra, the high side of the city is north of the colonnaded street, and the low part of the city is south of the colonnaded street. In effect, the city was divided in half by the colonnaded street.
If Petra is the holy city of Mecca, then the cave where Muhammad received his first revelation should be located there.
The ancient records say that the cave faced the town, and that it was low down since Muhammad tried to climb the mountain to throw himself off. If that's the case, I think I know just the spot, but we'll have to go over there. Here in this cave, we can see where there are many various god blocks. Up there is a large crescent symbol. This is just the sort of cave where young men would go to contemplate the meaning of life. The descriptions and location of this cave are just like the ancient records describe it. Just outside of the city, the entrance facing the city, and evidence that people spent time here in religious worship and meditation. I think that this is one of the holiest spots for all of Islam, and it's here in Petra.
Now,
Okay. Finally, an angel appeared and spoke to Hagar. The angel dug into the earth, and water flowed from the place he disturbed. Hagar made a rim around the place, and it became known as the Well of Zamzam. Genesis 14:14 describes Hagar as wandering in the wilderness of Beersheba. This descriptor is vague, but it seems to place her in the Negev, which is opposite the Wadi Araba from Petra. Interestingly, the 2nd century BCE book of Jubilees reads, "She opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water, and she went and filled her bottle with water. And she gave her child to drink, and she arose and went toward the wilderness of Paran." According to this Jewish tradition, Hagar traveled from the Negev to Paran, or the Petra wilderness. So there is an early pre-Islamic tradition associating Hagar's expulsion with the Petra area. Sheb Abu Talib, or the Abu Talib Canyon, was another important location near the holy city of Islam. The canyon was named after Abu Talib, an uncle of the Prophet Muhammad, and leader of the Banu Hashim tribe in the Holy City before the Hijrah. Al-Tabari recorded the story of how, in response to persecution from Quraysh, Muslim men emigrated to Abyssinia in East Africa from the Holy City, that's in Ethiopia. The Muslims who remained hoped that they would receive gifts of arms from Abyssinia to allow them to protect themselves from the Quraysh. But this did not happen. Following the migration, the Quraysh intensified their persecution of the Prophet and the few Muslims who remained in the Holy City. The Quraysh drew up a document stating that they would not intermarry with Banu Hashim and Banu Muttalib, the two key Muslim families. The people of the Holy City were also barred from buying or selling with the Muslims. This document was hung up in the Kaaba area for everyone to see, to make it binding. Very quickly, everyone else in the city joined in this boycott against the few remaining Muslims. The Muslims retreated from the Holy City to a nearby valley, where they lived for about 3 years. When the Muslims retreated to their homes in this very narrow valley, the Quraysh trapped them there. For 3 years the Muslims suffered, until the boycott was lifted. This situation was extremely desperate for the Prophet and his followers. If Petra is the original holy city of Islam, there should be a site near the city which suits the description of Sheb Abi Talib. It would be a box canyon, only one way in and out. It would have to be a narrow passage. Some accounts say that a camel would have trouble passing through it. It would need steep walls inside the canyon so that one could not climb out of it. It should be within walking distance of the city and the Kaaba, if the Prophet and Khadija lived in the canyon. Additionally, it should have evidence of dwellings carved into the rock. While there is a suburb of Mecca in Saudi Arabia that is known as Shib Abu Talib, it's not a canyon but a valley with sloping side, and there is no evidence that people could have been trapped inside of it. Recently, much of the valley has been demolished for the construction of a set of highway tunnels through the hills. But just a couple of kilometers from Petra there is a small canyon which resembles the description of Sheb Abu Talib remarkably well. It has a very narrow entranceway, so narrow that only a horse or camel could pass at a time. And this is it. There's your entrance, and this is the house. Right? See all of these houses? Obviously, nothing in Petra comes even close to what you're going to see in Petra. Nothing in Mecca comes anywhere close to what you're going to see in Petra. Okay, so page 209. Our studies lead us to believe that the Battle of Badr took place between Damascus in Syria and Petra to the south. You see, the Quraysh started their trek from Damascus, carrying supplies and arms to help them defeat the fledgling Muslim army in Medina. At the same time, a protecting force leaves the holy city, which I believe is Petra, and heads north to help them. These two forces meet at Badr, a common stopping place for caravans because of the water and grass there. Knowing that the caravan will stop there to rest for 3 days, the Muslims plan a quick surprise attack from the desert. The Muslims are outnumbered 3-1, but they attack. In the end they win. And it is a famous battle for the Muslims. The dead are buried and the Muslims ride away with all of the trade goods that the caravans were carrying, not to mention arms and money. I have placed this account in Qasr al-Kastal in Jordan. Okay, this is Qasr al-Kastal. Here's your courtyard, there's the graves, and they're all facing Petra. Okay, these graves are all facing Petra. So this is the most likely location of that battle. Let's go ahead and read this. Let's go ahead and read this first. By the 10 nights, by the even and the odd, by the passing night, is this oath strong enough for a rational person? So this is the translation of the Quran. Much of the translation of the Quran is actually corrupted. So I'm going to be sharing my translation, the actual translation of these passages. Is this oath strong enough for the people of the rock? Okay. Did you not see how your Lord dealt with Ad? The people of the rock are the people of Petra. Petra is actually a Greek word that means rock. Okay? Petra is a Greek word that means rock. So when he says, is this oath not good enough for the people of the rock, he's talking about the people of Petra. The people he's with. Okay? And so every mosque during the first 100 years of Islam pointed to Masjid al-Haram in Petra, not a single mosque pointed to Mecca. During the first 100 years of Islam, all of the mosques, as you can see, were pointing towards Petra. This is a map generated by Dan Gibson, and he did a study on this. If you read from his book, Let the Stone Speak, there's more information there if you'd like to read from there. All of the deities that are mentioned in the Islamic sources are found in Petra in the first 100 pages of his book, In the Direction of Arab Mythologies Before Islam. The writer describes in detail many of the pre-Islamic deities that were mentioned in the Quran and other Islamic sources, and shows how all of these deities existed in Petra. None of them were down in Mecca. None of these deities are found in Mecca. Okay? But here's one more interesting. This is very interesting. While traveling from Medina to Mecca, and while he was at Al-Aqaba, he said, "Take your rituals from me, for perhaps I will not perform Hajj after this year." So he was traveling from Medina, this is Medina on the map, to Mecca. According to Muslim sources, this is Mecca. And he stopped by Aqaba. Where is Aqaba? When you go to the map, you're going to see Aqaba is right here in Jordan. Okay, this is where Aqaba is in Jordan. So if he's going from Medina over here to Mecca, how could Aqaba be here when we know Aqaba is in Jordan? You know, how could he have stopped in Aqaba if Aqaba is in Jordan? But if Aqaba is in Jordan and Petra is Mecca, all of a sudden it makes sense. He's going from Medina, he stops at Aqaba, gives a speech, and then carries on to Petra, aka Mecca. Right? Before migrating to Medina and Saudi Arabia, the Prophet, who was in Mecca at the time, decided to meet with the Arab clans of Medina in Aqaba to discuss his migration. So he's meeting with the tribes that are coming from Medina, and he meets them in Aqaba. Why would he meet them all the way north in Aqaba if he's in Mecca, down in Saudi Arabia? If he's in Mecca, south of Medina, why is he going to meet them in Aqaba? Unless Petra is Mecca, as we've said, and they're meeting in Medina. They're coming up from Medina, and he's coming down from Petra, and they're meeting in the middle in Aqaba. Right? They're meeting in Aqaba. Chronicles 19:6. When the Amorites realized that they had become obnoxious to David, Hanun and the Ammonites sent 1,000 talents of silver to hire chariots and charioteers from Aram Naharim, Aram Mecca, and Zobba. Okay, they hired 30,000 chariots and charioteers, as well as the king of Mecca with his troops, who came and camped near Madaba, while the Ammonites were mustered from their towns and moved out for battle. So Mecca is referred to in the Bible as an Aramaic kingdom. Aram means elevated or high place. Yes, Aram means elevated. A connection can be made with Mount Seir, where Petra is located. This also explains to us the name Wadi, Valley, Ram. It must have been part of Aram Mecca. If you look at this map, the valley of Ram, Wadi Ram as it's called, is just south of Petra, and it's called the Valley of Ram, meaning the Valley of Aram. Okay, the Valley of Aram, the Kingdom of Aram. The Valley of the Kingdom of Aram. Which Aram are they talking about? Aram Mecca. That's the Aram they're talking about. Aram Mecca. The region of Islam is, from the Muslim point of view, the religion of Abraham and Ishmael, the forefathers of the Muslims, according to Ibn al-Kalbi, who conveys, Also the belief of his predecessors, Ishmael settled in Mecca, where he became the father of many children who supplanted the Amalekites of Mecca. To him is ascribed the origin of the Arabs. Therefore, when John of Damascus calls Islam the religion of the Ishmaelites, he uses a name fully acceptable to the Muslims. The Amalekites of Mecca, the Amalekites, as we all know, lived in this region, right? Here's Amalek on a map. You guys see the word Amalek? It's right next to Petra. This is the Amalek region right next to Petra, and they're called the Amalekites of Mecca. The Amalekites of Mecca, how could that make sense unless Mecca is Petra? Right? Mecca is Petra, and they were living in Petra. John of Damascus writes about the Muslims. They, the Ishmaelites, became idol worshippers. They worshipped the morning star and Aphrodite Venus, whom they called Haber in their language, which means great, and they remained as such until the time of Heraclius, when Muhammad appeared. And 500 of these Simeonites, this is from Chronicles 4:42 to 43, 500 of these Simeonites led by Palatia, Nearia, Raphaia, and Uziel, the sons of Ishi, invaded the hill country of Seir. They killed the remaining Amalekites who had escaped, and they lived there to this day. So the Amalekites were living in the mountains of Seir, as I've said, where Petra is located, and so they are called the Amalekites of Mecca. How does that make sense? Because Mecca is Petra. The first independent and clearly defined northern Arab kingdom known to us is that of the Nabateans, centered on Petra in modern Jordan. Although known by their local tribal names, Nabatu and Salamu, the Nabateans were certainly Arabs, and they spoke a form of Arabic language. For their inscriptions, however, they used Aramaic. People of Aram Mecca spoke Aramaic. This explains to us why much of the Quran is in Syro-Aramaic, as was discussed by Christoph Luxemburg in his book The Syro-Aramaic Reading. In the Torah, we are told of a people known as Zamzamim. The Zamzamim were a tall people who lived in the land of Seir, one of the early names given to Petra. So there's a possibility that Zamzam well was named for its ancient inhabitant Zamzamim. So this is very interesting. We've already read this before. We've talked about the people called Zamzamim, but what's interesting here is that they are called a very tall people. They are called very tall. And the Amalekites, in fact, the word Amalek means giants in Arabic. So there's a connection here. You see, the Zamzamims are called giants, and the Amalekites are giants. The word Amalek means giants in Arabic. My note, in fact, Mecca, which today we view as simply being the name of an important city in Islam, is a Sanskrit word meaning fire, and was the primal god in the kingdom of Saba in Yemen. Okay, so Mecca used to mean... Mecca, I have said this before, is a Sanskrit word. I think I've said this before, is a Sanskrit word that means fire in Sanskrit. But I have a few things that I'd like to add to this. I'm sorry, I've been speaking for so long. I think I'm getting quite dizzy, to be honest. Okay, how much more do we have? Okay, 3 pages. I think it's doable. 3 pages is doable. In Saba, the national god, Saba is in Yemen, by the way. This was an ancient kingdom in Yemen. The national god was Al-Makkah, a protector of artificial irrigation, lord of the temple of the Sabian Federation of Tribes, near the capital Ma'rib. Until recently, Al-Makkah was considered to be a moon god, under the influence of a new generally rejected conception of southern Arabian pantheon consisting of an exclusive triad, father moon, mother sun, and Sun Venus, recent studies underline that the symbols of the bull's head and the vine motif are associated with him, are solar and Dionysiac attributes and are more consistent with the sun god, a male consort of the sun goddess. So Al-Makka is represented by a bull's head, and there's some more evidence that he is a sun god, not a moon god. They originally thought the Al-Makka was a moon god, but he turned out to be a sun god. So the land of Uz. There was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job, and that man was perfect and upright, and one that feared God and eschewed evil. Actually, I think I might have to take a break. I'm so sorry. Okay, thank you guys for watching. Till next time.